Welcome to In the Frame. During your visit you may be met with explicit language and references, and spoilers throughout. You have been warned.
Welcome to In the Frame. We're the opinion that nobody asked for, and this week we're doing a classic review of Silence of the Lambs. I'm with Will, Rodeo, and Dan, as usual. Rodeo, why don't you give us a quick synopsis of the film?
Okay, so it starts with a rookie FBI agent. She's still in the academy. Her name is Clarice. She is asked by her superior to go and interview Hannibal Lecter. She's not told why, but it turns out it is because he might have some knowledge and insight on a case that they're currently working on, to do with Buffalo Bill, who is a serial killer who has been capturing larger women and cutting off their skin. It's later found out that that's so he can make a woman suit. So there's some interesting themes to do with transgender. There's also a lot of interesting kind of bits about feminism, with Jodie Foster as the main character.
Psychological aspects.
Yeah, very psychological.
Yeah.
But in essence, it's kind of a bit of a detective thriller kind of thing, catching the bad guy, trying to work out who he is, which in the end they do. I think the title ties into that quite interestingly because halfway through the film, when Hannibal Lecter is actually having a conversation with Clarice, she reveals something about her childhood in which she was kind of traumatized by lambs screaming when they're about to be slaughtered. And Hannibal Lecter makes a point that she's trying to save the victim of Buffalo Bill, because that will somehow kind of bring her a bit of closure for the lambs. It's as if the victim is almost a lamb to her, and the lambs will be silent when she saves someone.
What was everybody's thoughts when they walked away from watching this?
First impressions.
Creepy. Many twists and turns. Very good characters. Obviously, Hannibal Lecter,
This is a legendary character.
Anthony Hopkins.
It's got a good villain.
Yeah, and he's not even the main villain.
No, he's not.
And obviously, the main character, played by
Jodie Foster.
Jodie Foster.
I think it's really interesting that she tells the truth, because she could have made up any story to tell Lecter, but she obviously forms some attachment with him, even though she knows she shouldn't. And I mean, yes, she's a rookie FBI agent, but she's clearly trying to do her best job throughout the film. So it's interesting that she does actually open up to him when it's clear that she's lied to him before, where they propose that he can be transferred to that island, which is clearly fake. And he almost buys it as well, which is really interesting.
Yeah, that's like a bribery kind of thing to get him to give information on the case.
Would you tell him the truth?
That's a good question.
If I was in that position, there was no way I'd tell him anything.
That's what's interesting about his character, because he seems to know what to ask and what to say.
Well, he's a psychiatrist.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is a
works
really
well.
good idea for a villain.
And that's what their dynamic works really well. She's not like innocent, but having the whole thing going on, he knows that there's something like that going on that he can feed off of to get more information from her.
But you can see during the film, right at the start, she says that she wants to go into behavioural sciences or something like that. So you can see throughout the film that she's trying to play him, and he's just having none of it.
No.
Yeah.
But then at the same time, going back to what you said about she's not necessarily innocent, but she's kind of portrayed as innocent because she's still at the academy, she's still a student, she's not exactly a school kid, she's not young, and yet she's almost treated as if she's a student. She's patronised by everyone in the film, which is quite interesting.
Yep.
So it's kind of playing on that theme of innocence while she is, as you said, trying to play this, really scary psychological character.
Which Hannibal Lecter clearly respects, that she's trying to do that. How successful or not she is, that's sort of irrelevant to him. He's not interested in that. But
he did at one point say that he would be able to tell when she's lying. And yet, as you said, when she made that fake offer to him to bribe him to give them information, he didn't pick up on it. Or if he did, he pretended not to.
That's true.
So that's quite interesting.
Even though everybody is terrified of this guy because of what he's capable of, when he does escape, she says that line where she says, "I'm not worried about him coming after me," because he would see that as rude. That kind of thing. And the fact that you can have that understanding with a serial killer and a cannibal, think it's a really interesting dynamic that they introduced into the film. Like it's a higher class of killer. Like it's like a sophistication in it, and you get that impression from him all the time when he's sat listening with his classical music, when he's doing his drawings and stuff like that. The fact that he wants a sea view or just any kind of view for a start. Like he's interested in the little things in life, despite the fact that he goes after quite, like aggressive and large goals.
I want a room with a view. I want to see a tree. That was Anthony Hopkins.
Was it really?
It wasn't very good. Anthony Hopkins' performance in this film was really, really good.
Chilling.
Oscar
It was
worthy.
chilling. Initially, because you told me earlier on that initially it was going to be Sean Connery.
That was the first person they sent the script to, and that's who they wanted, yeah. But Connery turned it down because it was too vulgar, I think was the phrase.
Yeah.
I think there was actually quite a few people they approached to play Clarice before they got Jodie Foster in.
Yeah.
Which is pretty interesting.
I think she ends up being a really good choice, though. The dynamic that they have, the two of them, Jodie Foster and Anthony Hopkins, is just what makes the film.
Yeah.
Even though, like, they're only in, like, 4 scenes together, and Lecter's screen time is, like, 16 minutes. It still manages to carry the film because you still feel like he's always there, he's always watching. Even though the film's almost 2 hours and he's on it for, like, he's not even on screen for, like, an hour and 40 of that minute.
I think that impression comes down to the cinematography, doesn't it? When the camera sort of pans round and it's met with Hannibal Lecter's gaze.
Yeah.
Creepy.
I mean, the camera does that throughout the whole film. It's constantly, like, creeping around all of the corridors, all the corners and everything. It's almost like you're like another FBI agent that's with Foster, and you're just really nervous about what's around the corner. Like, it's kind of how I feel like the camera is throughout the whole film. They do a really good job with the FBI, I think. It really does feel like an actual case. I mean, it's kind of like Twin Peaks because it was around the same time Twin Peaks was on TV, I'm pretty sure.
It felt a lot like X-Files to me.
Yeah, I must admit, I found a lot of parallels with the characters and how they're structured in relation to one another. So Clarice is more or less the same character to me as Dana Scully in X-Files, only I think Dana Scully is less passive. She's kind of stronger, and I feel like Clarice I think she's almost demure in some places, which I don't necessarily like that much. I think it would be better if she was a little bit more plucky, but then maybe the kind of the lamb's innocence kind of thing would be lost.
Well, the thing with Foster's character, because she's a woman, she's got so much more work to do in this movie because women are really... They're just seen as a victim throughout pretty much the entire film. Even Clarice herself is. But she overcomes that, and that's what makes her character really endearing, I think. Because every order she's given is from a man, and it's not even like... I mean, she's even basically set up as like a honey trap, like when she goes to Lecter. Like, she's not even told the full story from her superiors. Even Hannibal recognises the fact that it's a really bold move.
Yeah.
And he sees through it straight away, obviously.
But he's the only one that actually sees her as an equal.
Yeah. Which is really interesting, actually. I mean, the fact that the serial killer in the movie is treating you like an equal and your work colleagues aren't, there's obviously something going wrong there. I mean, straight up, one of the first scenes in the film, Clarice gets into an elevator with just loads of other men, and you can just see their expressions.
And the fact that she is kind of a foot shorter than all of them as well. It kind of really plays with the kind of dominance theme.
And there's constant flirtation towards her the whole film.
Yeah, I mean, there's some really vulgar dialogue
Yeah.
directed at her from multiple different characters.
Yeah. But the fact that Hannibal's character thinks that's disgusting as well is also really interesting, because that does add to his sort of sophisticated killer kind of...
Yeah, well, I read online that the director said to Anthony Hopkins that Hannibal... He isn't a bad guy. He's a good guy in a murderer's like mind. So he is altogether a good guy, which I think you can see.
So on the topic of the representation of Jodie Foster as the female lead in this film, I found it very interesting that early on, when she's having a conversation with Hannibal, he asks her if her superior, Crawford, if she thinks that he just wants to have sex with her, if that's why he's kind of put her into this case. And she doesn't really reply. But then later on, just after she's got a medal at the end when the case has been solved, there's a very awkward bit of sexual tension between her and Crawford. And clearly we're seeing that Hannibal was right all along. And straight after, he actually phones her, and that kind of just seals that.
Yeah.
So it does just kind of show that she was only put there by a man. It wasn't by her own decision.
No.
And she was only put there because to him she was kind of a sex object. Mm-hmm. So despite the fact that she's a really strong female lead and she does kind of solve the case and it's all down to her, the only reason she's there in the first place is because a man has put her there.
But it's a victimization again, which runs through the whole film.
Yeah.
Especially towards women, because Buffalo Bill, there's women in. It's never, he never like takes a man or whatever.
Women are constantly seen as vulnerable. I mean, even her mother, the sixth girl that gets kidnapped, her mother, it's the fact that it's the mother doing the appeal. It's not the father, it's not any other family member, it's the mother. And because she's seen as vulnerable, and then they try and make her as a child look vulnerable, as a female and a child, through the TV ad that they try and appeal to Buffalo Bill with. And I think it's quite interesting that Buffalo Bill has affection towards a dog, but he clearly has this distaste towards human beings. I mean, you can see why this has been built up. Like, it really goes into the depth of his character. But it's interesting the way that he treats women, considering he wants to be one.
Well, isn't that he's making the suit because...
He was refused.
Earlier on, it's referenced that he did approach various different clinics asking for a sex change because he wanted to become a woman, and yet he was refused. And I think Crawford tells Clarice that he was refused because he's mentally unstable, because he's not really transgender. It's that he has some issues to do with his mother or something like that. So there's that whole thing of whether he actually is transgender, and that, the system's just pushed him into being a psychopath, or whether he's not, and it's just he's a mess.
I suppose Buffalo Bill is another serial killer that's based on Ed Gein, which sparked Norman Bates in Psycho, Leatherface from Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Buffalo Bill, and countless others. I mean, there's been so many that have come from that initial serial killer. But I thought this one was a new take on it.
It's interesting that Hannibal was completely made up. He wasn't based off of any character at all, or any real life story. I think there's a quote somewhere online where they say that no one would be that messed up. Which I thought was interesting, considering up against Buffalo Bill.
Well, he just takes the show, doesn't he?
I love the idea of the whole plot using a serial killer to catch a serial killer. I think this is one of the most refreshing ways they've ever done that. I want to also mention that I think the character development, especially with Jodie Foster's character, is done really well and in a really clever way, because they use Hannibal to develop her character so they can progress the plot and also her character at the same time. Like the fact that she ends up telling him her life story basically means we're in on that as well, so we get to find out what happened to her, and it's the exchange of information, and that kind of again ties into the way women are portrayed in this film, because she's kind of selling herself for information. That's what she has to resort to doing to solve the case. And so I think it's a really clever device to further the plot. Related
to that, there was two flashback scenes in it.
Yeah.
Didn't like those. I don't think they added anything to it. If anything, they sort of took you out of Hannibal's game, essentially.
I think the scripting was clever enough that they didn't need to resort to doing flashback sequences to actually get Clarice's character as a child across. I thought actually her story when she was talking about the lambs got that across a lot better than the two flashback scenes.
Yes.
Well, they stopped doing flashbacks after she started telling a story.
Yeah.
So
they kind of realised that.
Yeah, I think they were but it's a shame they didn't do that in post.
Yeah.
I mean, I like what they tried to do, but you're right, it didn't really add a whole lot.
Did anyone notice Buffalo Bill's tattoo on his rib?
Yeah, I didn't know what that was.
So he had a kind of, right here on his bottom rib, he had kind of a cut with some blood dripping off it. That was a tattoo he had.
Oh, yeah.
I did wonder if that was kind of a religious connotation. So he wants to be a woman and he's kind of creating a woman out of other women. He's creating his woman suit.
Yep.
And then there's the whole kind of, Eve was taken from Adam's, rib. So I wondered if that was kind of a religious thing to do with Buffalo Bill.
That's really interesting.
He has this weird thing where he calls his victims it, so he's kind of disregarding women as people. He's probably disregarding other men as people as well, but we don't actually see him interacting with any men. So he's only seen interacting with women. He doesn't treat them as actual people, and yet he wants to become one. but he's kind of making one himself. So I found that quite interesting.
Maybe he's distancing himself from his victims. If he refers to them as it, he's not then seeing them as people, essentially. So it makes it easier for him to just see them as a commodity.
And then he's kind of playing God with them, which is where the kind of rib comes in. He's creating Eve. But yeah, they're a commodity. They're just something that he's using to create his Eve.
When was this film made?
1991.
Oh, well, that's interesting.
Is it really?
I think that might coincide with the big series of campaigns against the fur trade. So using animals for their skin.
That's interesting.
That's really interesting.
Could be bullshit, but
It could be.
pretty pinnacle point in the film is the prison break by Hannibal Lecter.
Yeah. That seems really interesting because Hannibal is only ever seen in his cell before. So he is a captive, but he does come across as very relaxed, very calm, and very well-mannered. And then this is the turning point where we finally actually see him, just still with his calm exterior, eat somebody's face off, basically. Like, this is the first time we actually see him actually committing a crime and being as visceral as everybody describes him as. And I feel like you don't kind of trust that he is that visceral until you see it, and then suddenly I think it adds a whole other layer to his character that makes him even more horrific. Because you kind of just trust him. There's this odd trust that you had developed with him when he's speaking to Clarice. Because you kind of think if she trusts him to an extent, then you kind of think there's something there. So the fact that he then just goes ham, like...
Goes ham.
What?
Yeah.
Is that a thing?
Yeah.
Whoa.
Apparently that's the expression for eating someone. You go ham.
I like it.
That is a...
It is an expression, yeah.
Is it?
Yeah, going
Have you
ham.
not ever heard
I've
that?
never heard
Wow.
that. That's great.
Oh, right, yeah, it's an
I love
expression.
it.
That's why I used it.
But yeah, going back to the ambulance scene.
Yeah.
Like you said also earlier, how up until that point he's done a lot of talking, but no actual doing.
I'm a huge fan of the ending scene as well, the night vision
Yeah.
sequence. And I do like the intercutting between whether you know, but they have the two houses and the doorbell ringing, and then because Clarissa answers the door, as opposed to Crawford, who is on his way with a team, and you're very aware that he's about to capture someone who's not Buffalo Bill.
Yeah, it's that kind of cross-cutting
Yeah.
between two scenes that
Yeah.
it's cut in such a way that you think it is one scene.
Yeah.
And in
True.
fact, the FBI agents are in a completely different state.
Yeah. And I just thought it was really cool. No matter how much you know she's capable of solving this scenario, you just fear for her for the next 10 minutes of the film. And it's really intense, especially when the lights go off and they're down in the basement. He puts the night vision goggles on. It's the first time we see Buffalo Bill as what he must be like in general day-to-day life as well, because he's got that full-on facade of trying to act as natural as possible, but you can see his weirdness is seeping through.
That's another thing I find interesting. When we actually see him in his normal life, when Clarice knocks on the door, he doesn't kind of live his life as a woman. So
No.
he's not kind of necessarily living in a
No.
transgender kind of lifestyle, which is why it's kind of interesting that he's making a woman suit.
That's true, but then you could argue that he's not in character yet,
That's
because
true.
the character's not
Hasn't
completed.
blossomed.
He hasn't emerged from his cocoon
I was
yet.
going to say that, yeah. That's good, yeah.
Oh, that's clever.
That's what Hannibal said, but then Hannibal also said that was bullshit. So
What was everyone's thoughts overall? Is it a good film or is it a great film?
Overall rating.
I would say it's a good film and it's definitely a classic. I mean, it won 5 Oscars
Yep.
for good reason, but I think you definitely have to be in that sort of frame of mind to watch it because it can sort of drag a little bit. I think there's parts of it where it's a bit boring, can be a bit long, but there is definitely enough in there to keep you going. The main pulling point of this film is Hannibal Lecter, and it is a shame that he's not in it as much, but it pays off because it makes you watch the whole film just to see him.
I thought it was a very interesting film for a lot of different reasons, all of the kind of the subtext behind it, but then at the essence of it, it's still a great story. But at the same time, I do feel like the pacing for me kind of let it down slightly because it was kind of a race against time at the end because they knew that Buffalo Bill was going to kill the victim. That kind of desperation was kind of lost on me because it was such a methodical pacing. So I feel like if they'd changed that up a bit and made it a bit more desperate, it could have felt more like a threat. But then at the same time, it's methodical for a reason because of Hannibal Lecter, really. And the fact that he's not in it very much makes him much more enigmatic. All in all, I think it's a really good film. I'd definitely watch it again. I wouldn't go as far as to say it's one of my favourites, but it definitely gives you a lot to think about it.
I think it's a good film. Definitely think that you need to be in the right mood to watch it, and I probably won't watch it again for another few years, but it was good.
It's a twisted film, so it's difficult to shout about it, but I think it's got one of the best villains of all time. I think it's got one of the best scripts of all time. I think it's got one of the best protagonists of all time. It doesn't really fall short on many points other than the fact that it just ultimately is just a really good viewing experience. And the fact that you have to be in the right mood to watch it, I think that's what makes it a great film. It means you really have to think about it, and I think that's what you want from a film.
Yeah, it challenges your ideas and your perspectives.
And when you are in a mood to watch it, you are like fully engrossed in it.
Thrill factor.
I would give it 4 out of 5. The whole film is just a roller coaster of intensity and...
Really? You said you were bored earlier.
Like I said, if you're not in the right frame of mind...
Were you not in the right frame of mind when you watched it?
Yeah, when I first watched it, I was like, oh my god, this is awesome. And it's fucked up, but it's awesome.
I would give it a 3 out of 5 for thrill factor, purely because, yes, I thought the 2 serial killers were very interesting characters, and it was kind of a race against time, as I said, with trying to catch Buffalo Bill before he killed his next victim. But the reason I think it's a 3 rather than something higher is because of the pacing. It kind of didn't feel as thrilling as I thought it could. I thought it was more intellectual and interesting than thrilling, personally.
I think thrill factor 3 out of 5. The sense of urgency wasn't quite there for me, but it was really good.
Obviously, for me, it's a 5 out of 5. When the conversation does get really intense, especially when she tries to leave, she runs back to Hannibal and he's like shouting really intensely like what she needs to do, and then she's just left by her car in tears, kind of thing. I think moments like that just really they are really intense, and I think it's more deep-seated intensity than opposed to like the world's on fire type thing, and I think that's more intense. Thank you everyone for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. We've been In the Frame. Thanks very much. All right, just before we go, we're just implementing a new segment. It's called
Dan's Shitty Impressions.
Take It Away.
Okay, so initially who they wanted for the part was Sean Connery, so he would have sounded something like this. Have the lamb stopped screaming yet, Clarice?
Yeah, everyone. Bye.